Welcome in to this special edition of Exploring Intricacies with Joey and Jordan. Today the guys will be breaking down Zack Snyder's version of Cyborg in the recently released new cut of Justice League. What ethical dilemmas does this character present? What makes Victor Stone different from an AI? How does Victor Stone's humanity contribute to his decision making? All these questions and more will get broken down today, so get comfortable because you're in for a treat. All right. Cool. Live, ready to go?
Yeah.
I'm Joey. I'm here with Jordan. Jordan, how you doing today?
I'm good.
We are taking some time outside of class to a little talk about something that we saw, kind of connect it back to the course materials. So, Justice League came out in what, 2017?
Yeah, I believe so.
And did not get great reviews. Fans were pretty disappointed. So, at long last, they re-released, or I guess released for the first time, but it was kept away for a long time, the Snyder Cut. What it was originally supposed to be. It completely changed the perspective of the movie, at least for me.
No, for sure. They completely redid plot lines, character lines, expanded on the universe as a whole. It was completely different, really.
Well, one of those characters in particular we want to talk about that somewhat connects to the course themes is Cyborg, otherwise known as Victor Stone. One of the more prominent characters in the DC universe. He spent time as a Teen Titan, but in here he's a critical part of the Justice League. And essentially we want to go into the ethics of having a character being like Cyborg in real life. So, those who don't know, the character Cyborg, Victor Stone, is a stellar athlete who gets into a gnarly car accident, and his father, who's this renowned scientist, keeps him alive by combining what's left of his dying body with super advanced mechanical parts. So now he's got super strength and speed, stamina, he can fly, but he's also got this robot aspect with full access to essentially anything kind of digital. He's somewhat all-powerful in terms of a robot, still possessing that form of human identity.
Yeah, so this new version of the movie, they really stick to the original roots of Cyborg's origin story with the whole traumatizing accident with his mom and using the mother box, which is like a multi-dimensional supercomputer that was built on the edge of the world. And the father boxes and mother boxes are super impactful and important in the storylines of the grander DC universe. And Cyborg gets kind of thrusted into that role basically by almost selfishness of his father, realizing his lack of attentiveness to his son, realizing that he's going to have to commit some ethical decisions that we'll get to soon to try and have a second chance with his son, but it ends up basically completely upending the relationship because that relationship itself was terrible to begin with, looking to a father figure and just not having one at all. And so, you know, he really goes through a journey of trying to find what himself is with his relationship with his father and what he's going to do with this power because his father keeps putting pressure on him to, you know, do anything. But all he really wanted was his dad to, you know, like the things that he was doing and pay attention to him rather than, you know, give him the ability to upend a banking system.
Yeah. So essentially, yeah, like you touched on it, Cyborg just wanted that, Vic Stone, before he was Cyborg, wanted that relationship with his father. It's very clear that he was close with his mother and had a strained relationship with his father. Stellar athlete, but his dad wouldn't really give him the time of day. He was more committed to his work. And when he loses his mother and is almost on the verge of death, his dad brings him back, but he's kind of spiteful and carries a lot of resentment towards his dad. He feels like his dad made him a monster. And a lot of that's because he doesn't even know what he's capable of himself. And it takes his dad leaving a voice recording to kind of explain everything that he's capable of. And that's when Vic Stone really makes that transition to Cyborg. And he learns that not only is he capable of simple things like flight and super strength and, you know, turning his hand into some sort of blaster, but he also realizes that he has access to all sorts of surveillance means across the world. He can access banking systems, hack into internets, different servers all across the world. So essentially, he learns that from a computer standpoint, he's somewhat all-knowing and all-powerful.
Yeah, right.
And there's this sequence in the movie where he's kind of figuring out what he's capable of, and he taps into this surveillance aspect of his power and he finds this mother who's got young children, and it's very clear that she's struggling to get by. I think she gets evicted from her apartment. Things aren't going well. Well, Cyborg sees this, taps into the banking system, and just automatically gives her thousands and thousands of dollars, more than enough to get by. And he realizes that while he does carry some resentment for his dad making him this way, he sees that there's a lot of good that he can do with this power and this sort of all-knowingness. And that's when he kind of starts to embrace who he is and what he's capable of. This is before he's even with the Justice League, but he realizes that he has the potential to do some real good in the world. So that's definitely a turning point when his dad kind of explains what he can do. But that relationship is still strained, and ultimately strained till the end.
Right, and I think a really important part of that first bit with the voice recording is when the dad talks about how he's talking from a strictly like scientific and objective point of view when he's explaining all of those abilities. And he's talking about what he can do and how there's basically no limit. And it circles back later when he reconstructs the voice recording, but he actually, when the father goes to speak as a father into his son, which is something that really doesn't happen in the entirety of the movie, and even when it does, Vic completely ignores him because he's just so spiteful of what happened. There's a lot of basically resentment of trying to get used to his body first, right? When he gets his new body, that whole sequence is getting used to, okay, what is my new circumstance as an entity, right? With my abilities and stuff like that. But the resentment and the relationship between his father goes even further. It takes even longer. He gets used to having a completely cybernetic body with basically limitless technological abilities before he's ready to mend his relationship with his father, at least somewhat. And even then, it escalates further if we want to start talking about what happens to his dad.
It's hard because Cyborg and Vic Stone, they kind of coexist, but also don't. There's definitely a transition, and we can unpack a lot about the human element that is Cyborg, but it's also important to acknowledge, given the context of this class, the technological aspect of Cyborg's character. So, one thing that I tried to do to better understand how this would come off is I tried to identify where we've seen things like this elsewhere. And the first thing that popped into my mind, and when I say things like this, I mean a sort of all-knowing, all-powerful technological being. And the first thing that I thought of, I don't know if you've seen, I assume probably, is Ultron.
Yeah.
The Avengers. Now, Ultron's created to sort of work as a security system, but ultimately an artificial intelligence that learns how to think and decides that, you know, power and destruction is more the route that they want to go. The difference between Cyborg and Ultron is Cyborg is created not having this artificial intelligence, not having this sort of learning curve that he has to overcome. And I think what makes him so different is that he has such a strong human element. And Cyborg possesses the quality of wanting to do good in the world, whereas Ultron, being an artificial intelligence, kind of just has to interpret what he sees and decides what he thinks is good with no prior experience. And having dealt with artificial intelligence in this class too, that's what you have to draw the line, because while Cyborg's this all-knowing, all-technological superpower, he is not an artificial intelligence. He is a human at his core. And so he understands how to reason, understands things like empathy, and it's not something that he has to learn. And something that we've debated is, can artificial intelligences figure out things like empathy, and really actually are they capable of processing emotions? Well, we know that Cyborg is completely capable of that. So we saw Ultron, you know, go south and sort of become a supervillain. Well, Cyborg here is a hero, and the key difference, like we said, is the human element.
Exploring Intricacies is brought to you by FMS 394, Film and Technoscience. What better way to examine the complicated relationship between humans and technology than through discussion? FMS 394 provides you with the ability to examine the key role technology plays in our lives through cinema. Discussions with peers and readings of many texts provide you a learning opportunity like never before. Don't miss out. Register now for FMS 394.
if we think about this in the real world from a practicality standpoint, that's where it gets tricky, because does every human possess the ability to have such great power and choose to do good all the time? I kind of want your thoughts on that.
I mean, I think you make you draw really good comparisons between Ultron and Cyborg slash Vic Stone. I mean, looking at Ultron, like he's given kind of like a body to his mind, right? Like he has this AI, and they give him this body, and he, through his analysis, basically comes to the conclusion that other media has come to before, where basically, okay, in order to save the world, basically, I need to get rid of the parasite-esque humans that are destroying the world, right? And there's stuff behind that we probably won't delve too deep into, but although ethically you can see that as very flawed, logically you can almost see the way that kind of makes sense, and that's why that character makes sense. But when you go to Cyborg, he has basically he's given an AI body in a way to his human and humanity. So he has his mind still, but he has all the capabilities of all these AIs that go through, like Skynet and Terminator and, you know, Ultron in Age of Ultron and the Avengers. But it's not an AI that's making these presumptuous decisions. It's someone that had a life with a regular body, you know, regular issues. He's got traumas now and all this kind of stuff. And so it's just like you said, I mean, as much as he's really bearing down with all of those issues and traumas, he really kind of takes it upon himself to kind of close down and analyze what that means, and to slowly build his confidence in helping other people. And that ends up going outside of the law in some way, which is a common thing when it comes to these kind of stories. Like, you know, giving a lady $40,000 is probably against banking laws or something like that. But when you think of it
it's got to come from somewhere.
Right. But when you think of it ethically, that, you know, she was in dire need. She was, you know, supporting kids, and, you know, she had nothing. And so, you know, as a viewer of that scene, none of us have any resentment really against Cyborg. You saw the storyline, but the reality is that society leaves people like that woman behind all the time.
That's
so
right.
There has to be people like Cyborg, and that's not always, you know, in real life we don't get, you know, an alien tech-powered necromancer people to come help us, but there are people like Cyborg in the world, but they're just hard to find, and those are the, you know, the heroes that help us on a regular basis, and you can name those people or not, but I often believe that those people, you will probably never know their names, and you will probably never see them, because that is almost the right way to do it, right? So that lady will never know Cyborg, and I don't think he cares. He knows that he did the right thing and that she's going to be doing better. And so the people that stand up in front of their achievements and you know, put on a silver stage and be like, look at me, look at all the good I've done. It's like, that can be true. You could be doing all that good, but why are you, like, what is the reasoning behind that? Are you just doing it for all of that, that publicity and that recognition?
Yeah, you made some awesome points, and one that I really want to hit on is the difference between Ultron and Cyborg Vic Stone. You said, you know, when Ultron's working, he's thinking logically. When Cyborg's working, he's thinking with, you know, an ethical perspective. And that's a huge difference, because AIs, computers, they only know how to think logically, at least at first. We've debated whether or not they can learn to handle things emotionally, but at first they can only operate from a logical standpoint. So in a case like Cyborg and Vic Stone, to operate from an emotional and ethical standpoint is definitely huge. And like you talk about those heroes in everyday life, well, yeah, that's where his human element comes through as Victor Stone. And I'm trying to think about this from, you know, a real life practicality standpoint, because it's very easy. Let's say militaries across the world, if this was some sort of technology that were possible, I mean, think about the kind of weapon that Cyborg, not Vic Stone, but Cyborg could be in terms of like war. I mean, having access to every single database and server, international banking, uh, access to weapons and things like that. Where questions get raised is what kind of person has to be put in that situation in order for it to work okay, just like Cyborg. Whereas we don't want like an Ultron thing. If something like that, if technology were to allow us to create a cyborg in real life.
Yeah, I think you make a really good point on what has to happen. And honestly, the first thing I thought of was intent. When you think of Ultron, like, Tony Stark went out of his way to create that. And no, he didn't mean, his intent wasn't to create Ultron, but his intent was to create something with Ultron-like capabilities. When you have Cyborg, there's no intent behind that. And even if there was an intent behind, I guess, his father in a way, but it was more situationally based rather than, going out of his way. He's like, oh, I have this technology, I have my son, I'll just do that. And to go even further than that, Ultron didn't have a consciousness pre-Ultron, right? But Victor did have a consciousness, and he was a person before this. And so Victor is put in this situation where, okay, all of a sudden I am this. And it was completely against my will. And so I think in that situation, his grief and his self-guilt and all of that stuff kind of, like I said before, kind of collapses himself inwards, right? To reflect on what the implications of all this are. But with Ultron, it was more like, oh, I have this seething power now, okay? And I have this canvas that is the world and the internet and stuff like that. What can I touch? What can I become? What can I explore? And stuff like that. It's not an inward-facing questioning. It's outward-facing questioning. And I think that moment of Cyborg and Vic Stone, that identity crisis, was one important for his character development and his ethics and morality, but it was really important to just how everything ended up shaking out.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you. And as we wrap this up, to tie it back to the course materials, I think I've mentioned this a couple times in this little discussion, but one thing that we've really debated over the course of watching these films and reading this text is, are artificial intelligences capable of really thinking like humans by means of processing emotions and making decisions not simply based in logic? And so I think it's important to understand that for a character like Cyborg, whereas differently than, say, the artificial intelligence in like Ex Machina, is that his experiences as a human contribute to the decisions that he makes as a partial artificial intelligence. Right, exactly. And I use artificial intelligence meaning like a robot, as a cyborg. So it's very important to understand that the way he works as a character and as a being, as an object, because he makes that transition from full human to part object, part robot.
Right.
His core experiences as a human contribute to the decisions that he makes when he's given power.
Right.
And I'm of the belief system that, honestly, when it comes down to it, I really truly believe that a majority of people are innately good and want to help people. So I definitely think that the human element in his experiences, I mean, he was very resentful when this all went down. But his human experiences and his life definitely leads him to make those decisions and help the way he does from an ethical and emotional standpoint. And that's just where you have to draw the line from an artificial intelligence that only learns based on what it observes from its experiences with humans rather than actually living. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think you make a really important distinction there. And I think it's also important to note that there is somewhat an AI living within Victor in the mother box, right? Because you have the scene where he's faced with Superman and his system goes into defense mode and he's trying to stop it, but he can't. But you would also have, if anybody watched this movie, you wouldn't have any question that Cyborg is still a human and there's still he's making his decision making. Even though there is that aspect of AI there, you wouldn't question his humanity because of his action taken account for. But on the other end, there is no human experience, right, to build all of that up, which is what you're saying. But I just wanted to make sure to have that distinction that there is a seated AI within him, but that doesn't actually upend anything. It just becomes another aspect of him. And that's why I think that the identity of Vic Stone versus Cyborg, that's the Cyborg, right? He can't really control that. That's kind of who he is now because he didn't have a choice. But Victor Stone is still in control, and he's not like he was, and he's new now, but he's getting there.
Yeah, definitely. Well, Jordan, I mean, it's been a pleasure. As we've discussed things in this class, we've really only had the opportunity to discuss concept of artificial intelligence from a strictly logical standpoint, questioning when they can be like humans. So it's been very interesting and honestly a lot of fun to have this discussion talking about a human with artificial intelligence like characteristics.
Yeah.
And delving into what that means from a human, ethical, and emotional standpoint. So this has been a blast. Thanks, man.
Yeah, I wish we had some more time because it's almost infinite, really, the discussion.
There's definitely a lot to unpack, but who knows? Maybe this will happen someday.
Yeah, round two. Round two. I'm down.